people often confuse conversation and dialogue.
Okay.
And there's a big difference about it. Have you ever been in the fortunate position to be sitting in a room with other male adults watching a sports game?
Yes.
Have you ever been in the very fortuitous position of listening to the talk about the game after the game?
Yes.
They all watch the same game on the same television at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Has any new information exchanged between them in discussing the game? Absolutely nothing. That's a conversation.
Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want? Together we'll find the ideal path on the Way to Wow Show with your host, Kevin Bennell.
On this episode of the Way to Wow Show, we're going to be looking at some new ideas in the relationship realm in the mental pillar of the 3 pillars of attainment. I invited back Raphael Lapin, who did a session on dealing with difficult people. And this time, we're going to really focus down on dealing with family members, dealing with people most close to us in our lives, and get some thoughts from Raphael on how we can better understand them and create closer, more mutually nurturing relationships.
All right, gentlemen, a couple of LA Smash cocktails, something light and refreshing to keep the tongue cool on these warm days.
Thank you, Will.
Cheers.
Thank you. That looks absolutely wonderful.
Absolute pleasure, gentlemen.
Thank
Enjoy.
you. Thank you. This is a great idea, by the way, of having a cocktail before a serious interview. It brings to mind the story about President Lincoln.
Oh, yeah?
People came to complain about him, to him, about Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant, and said, "Mr. President, your Lieutenant General is always drunk." To which Lincoln responded, and he said, "I'm your commander-in-chief, and I command you to go find out what the general is drinking and give it to all the officers."
Cheers.
Cheers.
Let's try this out.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm not even sure what all is in
Well,
it.
this is
Yeah, this
phenomenal.
is amazing.
Yeah, this is good.
Plus, I get all my fruit for the day.
Tremendous. Really good. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming back. You know, you have the most viewed episode of the show.
Oh, that's wonderful. Do I get some sort of plaque or something to put on the wall?
You get my hearty congratulations. So, you know, in talking to my partners, I said, you know, we've got to have Raphael back. And I want to dig a little bit deeper into this issue of how we deal with difficult people. And I thought this time we would focus on family members. I think it's a different dynamic than strangers. I think it's much more complex. We bring, you know, baggage from, you know, our whole life, right? So I thought I'd ask you if you can address what you see as some of the unique issues of dealing with difficult family members or dealing with family members in general, and give us some thoughts on how we can do a better job of that.
Certainly. Well, probably when I get a call about mediating a family dispute, it's kind of my worst nightmare being realized. Because the worst disputes are family disputes. You know, I mean, you've got siblings arguing over a trust and they haven't spoken to one another for who knows how long. Or you've got spouses arguing over issues, sometimes in a divorce situation, sometimes not. Or you've got parents and children arguing. And when we speak about family disputes, typically there's history that needs to be dealt with. And we've got to be careful when we're trying to resolve a family dispute that the history past doesn't inform the way the movement forward. But what the history does do is, as long as parties aren't feeling that they've heard and understood, that history is going to obstruct any further potential for resolution. So it's necessary for the parties to be able to vent and liberate themselves in terms of talking about the history and feeling that the history issues have been acknowledged and expressed and communicated and heard and understood before you can start resolving the dispute moving forward. So usually I say, the way I look at it is a mediation, which involves that kind of issue, needs to be broken up into two stages, where there is some part of the mediation which is dedicated to allowing the parties to express themselves in a constructive and productive kind of way. The problem is sometimes when you start speaking about past histories, it becomes a cycle of blame and counter-blame and reaction and counter-reaction and defensiveness. And we've got to be careful to avoid that kind of situation. But the history needs to be dealt with. And that was part of Mandela's, I think, very, very clever idea when he introduced in South Africa the Commissions of Truth and Conciliation. And that was the purpose of the commissions, not to indict anybody or arrest and try anybody, but to allow the parties, the ANC and the nationalist government representative, to express themselves, to talk about past history, how they experienced that past history without judgment. But at least that each party can at least acknowledge and understand what it was like for the other party. So in family disputes, that's a really, really important part. First of all, in allowing that history to be expressed. Another part of family disputes, or any dispute for that matter, it really doesn't matter, but I think it becomes a significant obstruction in family disputes. And that is when we are dealing with someone else who's not ourselves, even a family member. It could be a spouse, it could be a brother, it could be a sister. We need to appreciate the fact that we're very, very different. And we're not the same. Typically, we try to assume they're going to be like us, or that they're expecting us to be like them. In any relationship, they are very, very different to us. And it's important that in engaging in that difficult conversation, in that relationship, I view the other party as a subject to study and understand. Rather than to accuse and blame in terms of who they are. And the richest relations that I've had have been relationships where there's been a lot of learning about one another. Acceptance are very different, acceptance of different things that impact them, maybe due to past history, maybe due to psychological makeup, could be a host of reasons, which isn't that important. But the key is that they're different to me, and I need to embrace that difference. And really try to understand and accept the differences and learn about those differences. And one of the examples that I give, I always bring it back to international relations. And in Americans' foreign policy and international relations, they haven't understood this. And you can't try to impose an American democracy on a tribal culture in Southern Africa or anywhere else in Africa, or an emirate or a sheikdom in the Middle East, or even on a communist country. They think different to the way we think. They experience things different to the way we experience. So we've got to understand and embrace the differences and work within the framework of those differences, but not to try to make them like me or make me like them. And that's one of the things that I always say about the difference between heterosexual marriages or versus same-sex marriages. And that is that the heterosexual marriages allow us to really grow, because the difference between man and woman is so great. And it allows us to really grow in terms of understanding those differences and embracing and thriving on those differences. But it requires a study, just like I would study any subject for that matter. I need to understand them, learn about them, and understand that I'm learning the things that may be very different to me. But that's perfectly okay.
So I'd like to dig into this issue of dealing with differences. So, you take family members, if let's say siblings, they grew up in the same family environment, it seems like they would be very much the same. Whereas, you take a husband and wife, so they, first of all, as you mentioned, they're different genders, but second of all, they may have grown up in very different environments, and yet, a lot of times the knee-jerk reaction to finding out there's a difference between me and you is fear, right? So how do we deal with first of all, how do we find out what are the differences, and how do we do that in a way that doesn't trigger a fear response?
Well, so the first, in terms of finding out that there are differences, is through dialogue and conversation, and effective probing and questioning. But effective probing and questioning is of no use if the recipient doesn't have what I call a constructive curiosity, that he has an excitement about learning about somebody else and appreciating the differences and the fact that there are differences, and I want to understand those differences, and accepting the fact, or embracing the fact even, that understanding each other's differences will make our relationship a lot closer. Not make it further apart. Every individual is an entire discipline. An example I like to use is bryology. Your listeners probably won't know what bryology is, but
this is bryology.
Bryology, yes.
Okay,
Do you know what bryology is?
I have no idea.
Well, that's why I like to bring it up, purely for the entertainment value of it.
I've never even heard of it, so.
Correct, and that's why I'm bringing it up. Bryology is actually the study of moss. You know, that green stuff that grows in dark, moist places on rocks and all that sort of stuff. That's bryology, the study of moss. And when we approach the study of moss, for example, if we happen to have a bizarre interest in it, we approach it not knowing anything about it, and not knowing how much or what there is to learn about it, but we approach it with a new excitement of learning. When we approach somebody else, whether it's somebody we've lived with for a long time or whether it's somebody new, we want to approach it as a new study, as I might approach the study of bryology if I would have an interest in it. That's an exciting subject to me. I want to know more about it. I want to know, some of the things that impact them, that affect them. How do they think? How do they experience things? And I think if we're able to understand that differences are valuable, not that they are hardships in any kind of a way, and accepting differences, I think it's a very, very important step in the exploration of those differences. And again, I use the word again, the embracing of those differences.
How do we listen with an open mind so that we can really understand the differences? And how do we, speak with an open heart so we can, expose the differences that we have to someone else, maybe someone who's hurt us in the past?
Well, I'll try to answer that question as succinctly as I can, given the time we have. People often confuse conversation and dialogue.
Okay.
And there's a big difference about it. Have you ever been in the fortunate position to be sitting in a room with other male adults watching a sports game?
Yes.
Have you ever been in the very fortuitous position of listening to the talk about the game after the game?
Yes.
They all watch the same game on the same television at the same time. Has any new information exchanged between them in discussing the game? Absolutely nothing. That's a conversation. Dialogue means that we have a conversation, but I've learned something from you that I did not know before. And you've learned something from me that you did not know before.
Okay.
That's being engaged in a dialogue. So when we are engaged in a conversation with a family member, or anybody really for that matter, just the subject of a discussion happens to be family members, we want to make sure, in a significant conversation obviously, we want to make sure that we're engaged in dialogue, not in conversation. And one of the things is to ask yourself during that dialogue, is there anything new that I'm hearing now that I didn't know before? And you can ask the other party after you've spoken and had a nice productive and constructive and purposeful session of dialogue, is there anything new that you've heard from me now that you didn't know before? And that then helps you sort of pull out and extract the new issues that might be the sort of pivot of what the differences are. So I find that quite a useful tool.
So what if you're in dialogue with someone who continually professes not to be learning anything new, even if you think you're exposing a lot of new information for them? Is there a way we can encourage the other person to, I don't know, look more deeply or listen more carefully to what they're hearing? Or
well, you can always try to say, was there nothing new, not even something small? I'm not looking for anything necessarily dramatic, but was anything even small in terms of maybe the passion with which I feel this particular thing, whatever it might be? You can maybe probe and press them a little bit. And if they don't continue, accept that and then continue the conversation and discussion. Just allow it to run its course and run its sort of natural course. But usually you'll find that if there's productive dialogue going on, at some point there will be flashes of revelation.
Okay.
In which both parties will understand. It's important to then take those out and use those to define and identify a difference. For example, you might find that you're involved with somebody else and you may have a very good sense of humor and be able to tease and take the teasing. They may be very different, and they may have had a family relative who teased them as a youngster, and as a result of that, they experience that in a very, very different way. It's important then to highlight that. And so, when I tease, it's not out of any malicious place, it's out of my experiences and my sense of humor. But I can perfectly understand how you experience that, and I will certainly try to alter my behavior with regard to that. But the dialogue is the key, to have that dialogue and to understand the dialogue is a learning conversation. It's not for me to get my point across.
It's almost like for me to teach the other person.
About me. Yeah, this is who I am. I want you to learn more about who I am, and not because I want you to be like me, but I want you to be able to appreciate some of the differences between us. And I would like to learn more about you in order that I can appreciate some of the differences from your perspective, and then to navigate those differences as we move forward.
And we want to do this kind of checking in periodically throughout a dialogue, right? We don't want to wait till the end.
Correct. Anytime you pick up, anytime you pick up a key point, even if it's small, you want to pull that out, polish it up, and give it back as a statement of, if I understand correctly, what I'm hearing here is this is something that's important to you, and I may have not necessarily appreciated that or evaluated that as a priority for you.
Well, once again, the time zoomed by. I got the wrap it up sign. We're going to have you back another time.
Well, I'll be happy to have you.
And I'm sure we'll be happy to make up another cocktail.
Yes, absolutely.
Raphael, thanks so much for making a return appearance.
Thank you so much. No, this is a pleasure. And, I certainly hope your audience will listen and challenge and question and maybe use some of the information that we were able to sort of let us emerge out of our discussion to an effective benefit.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
When we work in the relationships realm of the mental pillar, we can really, as they say, take Raphael's advice to the bank. Think about the difference between a conversation and a dialogue. That dialogue is there to learn, for us to teach the other person in the relationship about us and for us to learn about that other person. And so we need to periodically check in with them and say, have you learned anything new based on what I've said? Or here's what I think I'm learning about you that I didn't know before. It's very, very powerful. Sitting and listening to Raphael, I think of times recently where I've had that kind of dialogue with someone close to me. And it's really made a difference, not only in just my understanding of that person, but honestly in how deeply I love that person and how closely connected I felt to that person. Courage at all times, my friends, especially when you're dealing with relationships. Don't let fear get in the way of getting closer to the people that you care about. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's being afraid and doing what you need to do anyway. That's why I urge you to be courageous each episode. Marie, you are still my belle, darling.